And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 K-State Garden Hour Spring Kickoff Series, and happy Groundhog Day. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If you're a regular, welcome back. We've got over 550 people online already, and that is just wonderful on this wintry day. This webinar series began in the spring of 2020 as a hope to share extension gardening education during the height of the pandemic. With much success, with great success, we've reached over 16,000 garden enthusiasts just like you and me. This webinar is hosted by Kansas State Research and Extension. My name is Chuck Oddie. I'm the Geary County Extension Agent for K-State Research and Extension. Excuse me. Everyone involved in the development of this series is an extension professional for K-State. Most of us have a background in horticulture education or a related discipline. Most of all, we all have a love for educating and sharing important gardening tips. I know I've got plants already started in my light frame, so this is very timely. Before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Please use the Q&A feature for questions related to the presentations, not the chat, the Q&A. This is where we will look for questions and we'll get to those at the end. Should see a button somewhere on the bottom tab of your computer that says Q&A. Click on that. You'll be able to enter your question. Our moderators today are Calla Edwards, and handling the Q&A at the end of the program will be Jason Graves. Calla is from Butler County. Jason is from Central Kansas District, Saline County, I believe. They will be sharing information through the chat during the presentation, all sorts of helpful information, and they'll facilitate the Q&A portion of the webinar. Today's webinar will be recorded and we'll post to the K-State Garden Hour website. We typically upload additional resources related to each topic as well. If we share links through the chat, we'll link them on the website. Our website is also where you will have access to previous topics, I think from all 3 years, and upcoming topics for the 2022 series. Our moderator will send that link for this over the website. Today's topic is indoor seed starting. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Gregg Eyestone, Riley County Horticulture Agent. Gregg is a neighboring county, a friend, a colleague, and just an all-around awesome gardener. Please give us a few minutes as we get things switched around, and you won't have to see my face and you can see Gregg's slides. So Gregg, it's all yours, and everyone enjoy the presentation.
Thank you. As the slide says. So apparently, you have to start at the top. Well, I think this is a wonderful day for gardening, and particularly here in Manhattan, Kansas. We got 3 to 4 inches of snow. They actually closed down everything. I don't know why we've become scared of snow, but that's the way it is. This is my office building, so if you're ever in Manhattan, Kansas, and you want to stop in, say hello, I'd greatly appreciate that. And this is where I'm working out of today as well. So what I really love about this time of the year and starting seeds indoors is it's without problems, I think. I don't have to worry about sweating outside. I don't have any mosquitoes biting me. I don't have any weeds to pull. So there's just numerous advantages to gardening at this time of the year. Of course, it's in an indoor location. So our goal today is to have the necessary information to go from a seed to a plant into the garden successfully. In the chat, as people were putting some things in there, I see a lot of you have done this and are doing it currently. And so that's wonderful. It's a great exercise here in this time of the year. But our goal is to have fun and to make sure that we can do it the best we can. And so my question is, have you ever seen this situation? And I think it's fairly common for most beginning gardeners to have plants that they start indoors, maybe not giving them enough light and probably a little too high of temperature, actually, if you're growing them in the same living conditions that most of us like to appreciate. And so what I want to start off with here is a quick review of botany and what the plants are going to need to be successful. And so we use this acronym PLANTS. It's just an easy thing to remember. And PLACE is what P stands for. And so in this example here, you can see there's a lot of plants growing in that space. And so they need thinned out, obviously. And so PLACE is an important thing to remember. Liquid, today's gardeners are maybe not the best gardeners, but overwatering seems to be the biggest problem with our applying liquid to plants. And so I want to make sure that we're just providing what the plant needs, not causing some issues. A is for air, and that's not necessarily the carbon dioxide and air and oxygen around the leaf tissue, but air down around the root system. And so we'll talk about the potting medias that you can use that really help aid in that situation. Because we generally recommend soilless type of mixes, there's not a lot of nutrients maybe for those growing plants to utilize to fulfill their growing needs. And so we'll talk a little bit about the nutrients you need to apply. The two really big factors, I think, to be successful boils down to having the right temperatures at the right time for the plants and providing additional light. Typically this time of the year, there's just not enough light energy. Outdoors, we don't have plants growing because of temperatures and light, and so can't expect that to be working indoors very well either. So there's a lot of plants that we can start indoors. Vegetable wise, a lot of our cool season vegetables, we may want to get a jump start on and get those going. And we like to transition into some of our warm season vegetables. Pretty much any flower, I think, would be fairly well successful started indoors, and then we can move them to the outdoors as the growing condition allows. Some of them are a little bit easier to do than others, and some, as we get into some cauliflower, eggplant, onion, all these I've done indoors without really too much effort and challenge. Some transplants or melons, you can start them indoors, get a little bit early growth on them before you move them outside, but typically they do just fine if you start them from seed here, at least in our local conditions. And so that's just an option if you're wanting to try those crops. So why are we starting seeds? Well, I do all my gardening for fun. If it's not fun, I really shy away from that. And so I think that's probably the most important reason. There can be some economical reasons for starting seeds indoors. Maybe you're going to grow a lot of plants, and so it makes it more sense to buy them in seed. That's a little cheaper and get them going than have somebody else grow for you. There's particularly some plants that I like to grow that I locally can't find. And so that becomes definitely a factor, and almost you have to grow your own because you just can't find them anywhere else. You can have a more uniform and consistency of the crop, so make sure they're all at the same stage of growth. Sometimes you go to the garden centers and they've sold out of the most readily available ones, and another week or two they say they'll have the next crop ready for you, so you can avoid that. Early production, particularly in the fall, I can't find broccoli transplants when I want them, so typically I have to start them myself so I can move them out into the garden at the right time. Just sheer number of desirable plants. If you're going to plant a begonia bed like this, you may not want to spend the money on plants that have been grown for you, so you do it yourself. Personal satisfaction is a big one, and then a personal note, it gives my spouse free time because I'm busy doing what I'm doing, and that frees them up to do something else. What are you going to grow? There's lots of options out there. I want to highlight our plants recommended for Kansas website. And you've probably seen this, or if you've registered for us at the K-State Garden Hour, so that's the link right there. So recommended plants, particularly probably a vegetable publication for some recommended vegetable varieties. We also have the Kansas Roots website for more ornamentals. And if you're looking at growing maybe some wildflowers, there's this one down here, at least for Kansas conditions. These are some options for you if you're starting from scratch or just want to branch out, try something new and different. So a big question is, when do I start my seeds indoors? And that really boils down to temperature, how fast the plants are going to grow. And so for a generic answer, we can say 6 to 8 weeks for our flowers before, plant those indoors, get them going so they'll be ready to transplant out at the frost. Vegetables, maybe 2 to 8 weeks, depending on what you're trying to grow. You can always read the seed packet. I think they give you some information on when to start as well. Here in Riley County, Manhattan, Kansas, generally our last frost is in mid-April, and that is an average. So that means it rarely ever occurs. And so, you can play around with some of these weeks of starting. And it seems like we always want to be the first one to get our plants out into the garden. And that's okay to have that goal, but it's okay to maybe have to wait another week or two because of weather conditions before we get those out into our landscapes or into our vegetable gardens. So just a kind of a ballpark figure, we're looking at mid-April. In the chat there, I think we posted a few handouts that you can peruse at your leisure and see if there's some information there on timing of your crops and see if that works for you. Again, we're kind of trying to get them out at the right time and growing stages. It's best if we could start our plants indoors and grow them fairly quickly and have them ready to go outside without any delays, particularly in vegetable gardening. Sometimes if we have a delay, it kind of delays the maturity of getting that crop ready for you. But sometimes nature just provides issues and we have to work around that. So I mentioned in the chat, there's some of these guides that are available. So it talks about different annual flowers, vegetables, and there's perennials on there. And there's also the handout on just kind of a how-to guide. But if you look on here, so let's look at begonias, January 25th. We've passed that date. That means you can't grow them now, right? No, that's just a guideline. So look at these dates and work with when you have the time, kind of give you a time frame to get started. And if you look here, generally speaking, we like our crops need a warm starting media. So in this case, it'd be ideal if you could have your begonias planted in soil temperatures. When I say soil temperatures, growing media of 80 degrees. That makes them sprout as quickly as possible. In this case, that light, meaning to have your lights on so that it can initiate the growth stage. But also over here, typically we lower the temperatures after we have the seed germinated. So I think that's one of the keys to having a good, short, stocky, healthy plant. And we grow those by cooling them down in their growing conditions. And so 60 degrees, I don't know where you're living, but that may be a little bit too cold for me in my house during these winter days. And so you're going to have to locate a room or find a spot that is not as heated as much as the other living areas and work with that. Now, if you want the ultimate how to grow plants and the conditions that they need, you can purchase this ball cultural guide. It's $60 as it says here, and that would have kind of the whole encyclopedia of plants and how to grow them and all those things if you're wanting to find a real good resource to determine when to start plants and how to grow them. If you want to use a more free resource that's available out there, many seed catalogs and websites have that information as well. So I got some Terenia seed that I'm going to start here. And as you look up here, germinate, do not cover seed, it says. So that means it must need some light. Looking at 70 to 75 degrees, growing media would be good. And it's going to take maybe 7 to 15 days for those to sprout. We start those fairly early because it takes 12 to 15 weeks for them to get to mature size. In this case, they're looking at 4 to 6 inch pots is what they're wanting to accomplish. But so lots of resources out there to determine when you should start them and the growing conditions that are required. And I ask you to reach out and look at those. If you have questions, always reach out to your local extension office. They can help you as well. So our seeds, purchase the very best seed that you can. It's relatively cheap side of the process. It's only about 5% of your total cost for growing a plant. If you're using some older seed, I'm not sure if it's viable or not, you can test it if you want to. So sprout some in a moist paper towel in a plastic bag, put 10 seeds in there, put them in a very warm spot and come back in a week and see what is sprouted. So that's an option. Or you can just try them in if you don't care and you have the space, just put them in your regular growing process and see how many will sprout for you. Some causes, some reasons we have some challenges. So, maybe the seed's too old. There's information out there. It depends on how it was stored or purchased. And so if you want to keep seed over time, slow the respiration down, cool, dry spot. You can even stick them in the freezer or refrigerator if you want to, but maybe the seed's just too old. That's why it's not sprouting. They do have different time frames, maybe based on some of your media temperatures, but some may take a long time to go ahead and sprout. So just kind of research your crop that you're wanting to grow and find out all about it so you can see if it's following the parameters that have been identified, so that you don't get frustrated or impatient on whether it's coming up or not. Some seeds need to go through that cold cycle. I think about wildflower seeds quite a bit, and so you may need to cool those or stratify them. So if you're not sure, it won't hurt them by any means if you were to throw some in the refrigerator. If it's an unopened package, you can just do it that way. If it's been something that's open, you may want to put it in a plastic bag and seal it. Some of them will prefer some cold, moist stratification. And so in that case, you could throw some moist vermiculite in with it. So just make sure you're identifying your crop and what the particular needs are. We saw earlier that some seeds need light to germinate and others will be inhibited by any type of light, and a lot of them really don't care. But again, research your particular crop to find out if you need the lights on as you're starting or no lights at all. They're all going to need a moist environment to get starting, so go ahead and make sure your media stays moist, constantly moist, but not overwatering. And some have really tough seed coats and need scarification. So you may need to file the seed coat, make it more permeable. Some of them need boiled or soaked in water for some time period before you go ahead and get them into your seeding operation. So just be aware of what the needs are for your particular crop. So generally speaking, again, we can talk about media temperatures being around 70-ish. So here I have a electric soil heat cable, and it is set at 74 degrees. So anytime the soil media gets below that, it would come on. And this is one way of making sure you have the right media temperature for the different crops that you're starting and growing. Probably a little bit more common nowadays is this heat mat. And down here is my setup actually in my operation. And so the heat mat is down here with the flat on top of it. In this case, I'm able to regulate the temperature, purchase a thermostat separately so I can regulate that. And here's my probe that I stick in the moist media to determine when to kick it on and when not to. And why is this all important? Well, we can get faster germination. We are Americans, and that's typically, we would like things to work out as quickly as possible. And so instead of maybe taking 10 days, we heat that media up and we can get her done in 4 days. More of our seeds are going to germinate. So some of those that might have been on the borderline of have vigor in it, goes ahead because all the conditions are just perfect, and you can have more of your seeds sprouting up. And it does create a more even germination rate. So you don't have some that just sprouted and then 2 weeks later you find some more coming up. Again, you can always work with those situations, but that may be a reason why we would want to make sure we're doing having the heat mat and doing the temperatures at the right ranges for the particular crops we want to use. Why I have this slide on here, this just shows, this is the system I've been using for over 30 years. And there are some updates that could be done to it, but it works fine. So this is what I continue to use. Fluorescent bulbs, the T12s, we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And here's my temperature. So the heat mat raises it up to whatever I need, 70, 80, but my environment is around 68 according to this thermometer. I would say that it is very important because I grow this in my safe room. And so in case there's a tornado or something happens and the house goes away, I know that all my efforts of growing my plants are safe as possible. And anyway, this works fairly good for a cooler area in my living space. So growth rate is regulated by both light energy or photosynthesis and the temperature. And we know that for every 10 degrees increase, we can double the rate of growth of your plant. Typically, we don't have enough light energy, and so we don't really want those temperatures to rise too much. If you have enough light energy, you can make this work for you. But oftentimes what we get is those long, leggy plants that aren't sturdy, and you look like they'll flop around and fall apart once you put them out in the garden. And so temperature is very important. Again, I want to really emphasize that. And maybe cooling it down is really what we need to do instead of speeding it up. Let's move into some of our medias that we use to grow our plants in. And there's lots of options nowadays. Most of them are synthetic or soilless mixes. We like them because they have uniformity, they're freedom from our diseases and insects, and easily to use. So just some examples. Typically what we're looking for in a media is something that has light weight, is porous to let that air down in around the root system, well drained again, so that we're not overwatering our plants, but yet it needs to retain some moisture to make sure at least starting out the seeds stay moist. Typically they're all low in fertilizer content, and I would suggest that you not purchase media that has already been charged with a fertilizer. I would rather add it myself than pre-packaged products, but that's maybe just a personal preference. But typically what we're looking at is equal parts of maybe peat moss, coconut coir is a replacement for that, vermiculite, and perlite. Quick review of what those look like. And so vermiculite, this is the horticultural grade here. There's another grade out there, so make sure you're purchasing what you want. It's a little bigger, maybe for more larger containers. I've used this for insulation, so it has different uses. Over here on the far right is our sphagnum peat moss. And if you look at a seeding mix, it is a combination of sphagnum peat moss, and vermiculite mixed together. So all these can be utilized. You can learn how they function, and whichever one you have the best results from would be the way to go. But typically these are ones that are available and readily used. I typically start most of mine that I would be starting as a seed and transplanting into a larger container to grow out, to put out in the yard. I typically use the vermiculite horticulture grade to start in. There's also perlite, the white product that you see for good aeration into the soil, good drainage. And you are not going to find the Gregg's Grand Champion mix out there. That's something I just throw together and try to do the best I can. So that's just a combination of all those things that I buy separately and blend them together. I have not necessarily always got Grand Champion at the fair, but I try. So this was my junior high stab at a science project that didn't go the way my hypothesis was. But I recently started these tomatoes in 3 different medias. So here's just my vermiculite, which would be easily to pluck those seedlings out to move them into a larger container, because place-wise they're overcrowded, and so we need to transplant those. This here is Gregg's Champion mix, and you can see now, I didn't do this very scientifically. I just threw some seed in each container, so there's not like this one really did better than the others as far as population, but these have grown in the potting media a little bit better, a little bit taller. And I threw some in here that was supposed to be my don't do this ever, because this is just natural native soil. And again, don't take it as the very few came up, because I didn't measure how many seeds went in each pot. But this one I did put in my sunroom with the anticipation that it would be leggier and not as sturdy. We've had quite a bit of sunshine, at least up till today, so they've done actually fairly well just in my sunroom. That's not a south-facing window. It has actually light on 3 sides, so it does get quite a bit of light. But just an example of some potting medias and what's worked, at least in this little science project. I don't know if I would have got a ribbon at the school or not. We'll talk about containers, and there's a whole slew of containers that you can use. Typically, you purchase plants in some of these plastic containers. So those are often utilized. This one here is a 36. So if you could buy a flat of these, you'd actually have 36 plants. That's where the name comes from. Works pretty good. Plastic, can use them over and over again if you want. There's also these fabricated compressed media that you can just plant in, and then if you want, just set it in the soil without disturbing the root system. Typically, you know, we have some wicking of some moisture, and so sometimes you want to make sure you've planted it all the way down, or take the top off so it doesn't wick moisture away from the roots. I've heard those aren't too bad for starting broccoli and some other plants that really don't like the roots disturbed. And you can find them in all different kinds of shapes and forms for whatever you want to work with. And then there's always the fun ones we use with our school kids and things, the Jiffy 7s or the compressed sphagnum moss that you soak in some warm water for a while and watch them expand, and can use those. So, you know, anything that you want to use. Egg cartons have always been used too. We do like to have the drainage in there, so make sure your container doesn't allow too much moisture, and so make sure that's really the only requirement of a container, is that it allows excess water to drain away. But again, anything you want to use can work. These plastic ones, I've used them again for over 30 years. I don't break down too fast, and so, you know, I'm not a plant pathologist, but I will say that if you want to clean your supplies beforehand, that's always a good thing to do. I've always used soilless media, sterile materials, and I've reused these over and over and over again. Haven't come across any problem, and I might have just jinxed myself, but so far so good. So sowing your seeds, broadcast or sow in the rows if you want to. I do have a flat that I use for my seedlings. So just a container, just put vermiculite in this moist vermiculite, sow my seeds as necessary, and let them come up. You know, different seeds have different requirements. Again, just to learn about your crop, whether it needs to have a little sunlight. You know, typically the smaller the seed, the closer to the surface it can be. Generally, you know, we're going to put something over it probably to hold that moisture in. And so almost can have seeds right on top of your media. Larger seeds, you may put them down in that a little bit deeper, but we're going to keep those seeds moist. So you can mist it with a mister, walk by it every 15 minutes and mist it down if you want. There's lots of domes out there, plastic clear domes that can work. Some are pretty high and get your light away from your plants. But I've often used just a clear plastic wrap over the top to seal the moisture in, and really don't have to water it until those seedlings are pushing that plastic up, and I take the plastic wrap off. Again, soil temperature, media temperature, 70, 75 degrees is generic. And I do use a heat mat for starting my plants. I've tried them in the warmest place in the house on top of the refrigerator, and just not as effective. So signs of low light. If you've grown plants and they look like that, temperature may be a factor, but also the amount of light energy that these plants are getting. And so it's something we really need to be aware of and concentrate if we want to have great success at this. So there's 3 different aspects of our light. We have the quantity, the blue and red wavelengths. We'll talk about that in a little more. detail the quality. To make more light of an object, you must either move the light closer to the surface of the leaves or have more light available, add more lights. And then duration, we'll talk about that, how long we need to leave the lights on. So light quality, so plants are going to respond to growth in these different 460 nanometers or the 730 nanometers range. I cannot find that information anywhere on a light source. So to look for that right information, we look at the Kelvins on our situations. And so here's a light, an LED light you could utilize if you want. And this packaging comes with some pretty good information. So we're looking at wavelength, what we want, 3000 Kelvins. And this one, if you look here, it says 3000 Kelvins. So this may be a good light to use, particularly if you're growing something that needs to flower and produce fruit. So the red wavelength, the 3000 Kelvins, is a little bit more for plant growth as far as flower, seed production. Probably not what we're trying to accomplish right now. We're just trying to get some green tissue up there, get it sturdy, strong enough to be able to move outside. So probably want to look more down here when you're purchasing lights that are in the 5000 Kelvin range. That's really more of what you're looking for if you're just starting seeds indoors to plant outside. Just naturally, we have more light in the summertime. This represents the summer light availability. Right now, there's just not as much because of the angle of the sun. So just a visual there. So if you want to do measurements, they have this daily light intervals for greenhouse situations. And it's pretty just common sense, I think, says that we just don't have a lot of light energy, particularly here in January and February, starting to get some more light energy come March time. And so this just means, you know, if you're trying to grow it in the south window, you may be struggling. Also, the temperatures right next to your window are pretty challenging. And so probably best just to purchase some equipment, which typically doesn't have to be a lot of expense. Again, for light on a clear sunny day, they can say it's had 10,000 foot candles. We talk about right now, clear winter greenhouse, there's about 1,000 foot candles. If you're trying to grow a house plant in the sheer curtains, 100 foot candles, and we need at least 50 to 70 foot candles for minimum growth. And that's maybe more for house plants that are tolerable of lower light growing conditions. So for our situation, we're probably looking at something in the 2,000 foot candle range for some growth. And you see here that if you have 3,500, that's probably maximum growth for a lot of plants. Anything over that, the plant's going to have to let it diffuse, go through, or reflect back, because it's just not necessary and actually it's creating too much heat. So the plant has to respond that way. We don't really use foot candles anymore. We use other ways of measuring light output, and we'll talk about that here shortly. So some of the old options that are still viable and still work, the T12s is what I'm still using, the very large 1.25 inch bulb that we typically used to use. Uses a lot of energy, puts out some light, so that's good, but is a little more not as energy friendly as other options. The T8s, which are typically the ones used in indoor lighting in a lot of our buildings, that's what I have above me, uses less wattage and still puts out actually more light energy for plants. And the T5s in my house, they're under the kitchen cabinet situation, those really skinny bulbs put out a lot of light and use a lot less energy. So those are all options. They all can be used. They do get dirty, so you do need to clean your bulbs occasionally so that the light is not hindered from getting to the plant tissue. So fluorescent bulbs still work if you want to go that way. So I talked about foot candles, and we don't find that too much, but we can look at lumens on some packaging. And I mentioned that 2000 lumens is kind of a range to be at so that you're getting enough light energy. And we could bump that up to, what was it, 3500 to maximum. So again, on our packaging, if you're looking for, how much light energy do I have? So on this particular one, again, over here, it has 1100 lumens listed on this packaging. So, if you had 2 of these bulbs with your plants under it, you'd be having probably pretty good light energy going into that plant, and you're probably getting pretty good results on growth. If you're still doing the T12s, standard T12s, initially when the brand new bulbs are going to put out, 2650 lumens, so that's enough to grow some plants. The T8s we mentioned produce more light energy at less wattage use, so they're more energy friendly, 6% brighter than the T12s. The standard T12s are designed for 2300. So what that means is, they start to diminish over time, over use. Our eyes probably can't recognize that, but I think the plants can. And so you just want to make sure, if you're using your lamps for 3-4 years, and maybe they're not as bright as they used to be, and you need to replace those, change them out. And the T8s, they're just more energy and put out more light. T5s would be even a little bit better. So this is, again, I've been doing this for 30 years, and this was my light meter that I had. And so that's what was going on. That's how much, this doesn't say how many lumens I'm getting, but it does say I'm getting light to my plants, and it's working okay. Now, if I could move my plants closer to the light source, that needle really goes up. So the point is, your light, depending on your light source, it needs to be fairly close to your leaf tissue to be getting all that light energy that's available. So the farther away the lights are, less light energy that those plants are getting. We like to use fluorescent lights. They don't put off a lot of heat, so your leaves can be right next to it, maybe even touching the bulbs, and you're not going to damage those tissues. LEDs don't put off heat either, so that works, but you don't actually have to have them as close. So that was my old light meter that I still use. Everybody that has a smartphone can download a free app and get your own light meter. And so this is Photon. I haven't totally used it. I've checked into it a little bit, but if you don't want to purchase a light meter, you may already have one. It's a free app, and there's probably many others, but that can give you some readings so you know exactly what's going on with your lights and aren't just guessing. I guess I'd use this if I was maybe thinking I was having a problem, but I like to wash my plants, interact with my plants, and if they look like they're doing okay, I'm not real worried about exactly how much light energy they're getting. As long as I have some of my parameters set up with the right Kelvins and lumens getting to them, I think they do pretty good. So let's talk about LEDs. They are probably more utilized nowadays. So you can get them in all the different Kelvin ranges, if you will, nanometers. So you get the wavelengths that are needed by your specific crop. And there's a lot of research or looking into these, what is needed exactly by each plant, how much light, how long do they need to be on, and all these things. But one thing, if you're getting into this, what we're looking at is photosynthetic active radiation. They call it PAR. So that's getting the most bang for your buck, if you will. So you're not wasting energy and or light that the plant doesn't need. And so there's formulas for that, and depending on your light source, determining that. But LED lights, they offer great control over the light output, the different wavelengths. Again, seed starting, we're looking at the blue light range to get the good vegetative growth, and I think that's all we're mainly concerned about for our needs. This is, as you see, this is my operation, and I do have an LED light, and I purchased this particular one to grow a tomato year-round. And so I have the red light the 3000 Kelvins area there, so it produces flowers and fruit, and has worked. Sometimes I lose interest in this project. I've tried to kill a tomato. It's on its 3rd year of growing. Currently is producing tomatoes today even, but so you can obviously garden year round indoors if you want to. But right now we're mainly talking about getting seeds started and having them moved out into the garden. If you want to learn all about LED lighting for urban agriculture, there's books out there, reference information. That's one I just found at the library. All kinds of options on your lighting systems that works for you. I'm a pretty poor woodworker, but I just built my stand out of wood. But there's commercial operations that you can purchase. And if you want to make a fairly cheap and easy light stand, we do have this up on our website at Kansas Healthy Yards and Communities. Kyla may put that in the chat box, but you can search that if you want to, just using some PVC pipe. And you can use the fluorescent bulbs in that stand or LED, and whatever light system you want to work with. The goal is you have the capability as your plants grow to move the lights with them, so you can keep raising your lights as your plants continue to grow, so that the light source is just above the leaf tissue. All kinds of commercial operations. This is just an example. You can spend $3,000 if you want to and grow plants for the whole neighborhood, but just lots of options out there. So just kind of summarize, you can use the fluorescent lights. They're typically, a cool white will be in the Kelvin range that we want for our growth. And the question is, how long do you leave them on? You'll see a lot of reference information, 14 to 16 hours. Mine are on continuously. Maybe I'm wasting energy, I don't know, but mine just stay on continuously. I had a master gardener that gardens in Alaska, and the sun never went down, and they had the most fantastic crops with all that light energy. And of course it was cool, they're cool season crops, but so I don't think plants have to be sleeping, particularly in this stage when we're just trying to get them up and out into the landscape. LEDs, they may say 22 hours, or again, I would just depend it on how well our plants are growing. If you're fertilizing a lot and your temperatures are high, you better leave the lights on so that they can kind of match that type of growing conditions. And again, some require some light for starting plants and some don't. Once your seeds have come up and through, of course, you want to just keep them watering, but maybe not as frequently, and probably want to move them to a lower temperature location. If your media is 75 degrees, that's probably too warm for the plants to continue growing in that environment. So I grow mine, of course, again, in the basement where it's cooler. Lights, again, probably just leave them on, but if you want to regulate the light time, you can. And you need to thin them if they're too crowded so that they have room, or you can pop them up and pot them up into another larger container, depending on how many you need. There is a potential for a fungal disease, damping off disease, it's called. When it's in its very active stage, you'll see white cottony balls stretched across the soil. It's fungus and attacks at the soil line. This is typically if you're using some potting soil, or soil that you brought in from outdoors may contain that. All the purchased products, vermiculite, perlite, coconut coir is all sterile, so it's not going to have any of those situations. So really encourage you using those. And a moist environment is always favorable for fungus. So if you can keep it dried out a little bit, or a circulating fan, that will help reduce the potential for this problem if you're going with soils. So here's my transplanting tools that I use, and as the plant gets large enough in my tray and I need to transplant it after it's got its true leaves. And so on these particular cole crop, the broccoli down here, these are our seed leaves. So typically we wait till we start to get our first true leaves. and we pop it out if we need to and transplant it into a larger container. Again, my information on cold crops like this, the roots don't like that. So those seeds are pretty large, and you can probably just plant 1 or 2 in each container and get them to sprout, and pinch one off if you get 2 of them growing. But if you're growing a lot of different plants that need separated, you know, once they get their first true leaves, that'd be fine. I did work in a greenhouse one spring, and it's pretty vicious. It wasn't a little tender. We take this little tool and just gently pick it out. We didn't have time for all that. So we really just ripped them apart and shoved them in, and it really works pretty well. So depending on your nurturing abilities, don't worry about it. If you're a little aggressive with them, they seem to be pretty tolerant of that. Because we're using a lot of medias that don't have nutrients in them, you may eventually have to add some fertilizer products, and probably just need to read and follow the label directions. Again, if your light situations are not as strong as we'd like, probably don't want to over fertilize them, overstimulate them. But maybe at some point, if your plants aren't looking nice, vigorous, dark green, you want to add a little nutrients during one of your watering practice times. Any fertilizer, has, you know, some phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium. So now we're have them up, and we're thinking they're about ready to go outside. So probably need to get them prepared. At least here in Kansas, we have some strong winds. We have cold temperatures. When you're ready to plant, and you kind of have to get them acclimated to that. It's called hardening off. So at least a week or so beforehand, you want to get them more exposed to their natural environment they're going into. That's going to be probably a little stronger light than maybe you've had indoors, temperature fluctuations up and down. But really, we need a sturdy plant. And so to get them ready for that, they need to get adjusted to our wind. And you see in this situation, I oftentimes run a fan on them. I've read where you can just go and pet them if you want with your hand a couple times. But if you don't have the time to do that, I just set my fan up on them, get them started. And again, you're going to get them adjusted to the outdoors. You know, first couple of days, you bring them in and out during the day. After a while, you try to leave them outside, maybe in a kind of protected area, but gradually getting them more accustomed to where they're going to go. There used to be a saying that you quit fertilizing them to make them tougher, and maybe not water them, but I think that's kind of ridiculous. And so go ahead and continue to water and fertilize as needed. No reason to tough love them at this stage. So now we've had success. We got them up and growing, we're ready to put them in the landscape. And so basically you're just going to do your good practices of planting them. Again, the root systems, some people get a little scared about them, but I think they're pretty tough. But get them into the soil, water them in as best you can. And oftentimes some of our crops can't extract the phosphorus in our cold soils. And so we use what's called a starter fertilizer or something with some phosphorus that first time. It doesn't take much at all, just a little bit to get them in there. And then the wind is a challenge, at least here in Kansas. Make sure they get them anchored, and may have to put up some type of windbreak depending on the size of your transplant that you have. And again, we're always trying to go for a short, stocky, dark green transplant, whether you're growing it yourself or going to the garden center and purchasing it. And so that's going to be the best one to get adapted and take off. So with that, I think I've gone through everything that I can think of. There's probably lots of things I missed, and we'll answer some questions.
Well, Greg, I think you did a great job there, and I even picked up a few new hints along the way, so I appreciate that. And the pansies I've got growing will probably appreciate it too. So we do have some questions to cover. We're going to have our moderator kick off the Q&A session. Jason should be coming online here, and he'll feed the questions to Greg.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, we've got some good questions here for you. So we're going to kick it right off here with a question about seed packets. When the seed packet says, gives you that date, like 60 days to, are they talking about, is that from, when you plant the seed, or is that from transplanting the seedlings?
That's a good question. It may depend on the crop. So typically our normal transplants, those harvest days is typically after you got the plant up and in the ground. So if your tomato says harvest in 60 days, you probably need to start 6 weeks ahead of time to get to that point. And again, if you want to be the first one on the block to plant your garden and potentially get it frosted out and plant again, you can do that, but I wouldn't worry about being the first one, and just make sure we get healthy plants and be successful.
Awesome. So we've had a couple questions about some of these insects that we get when in the process of seed starting, specifically maybe white flies has come up a couple times, as well as the fungus gnats. So, I mean, have you experienced that? Have you done anything about that? Any suggestions?
Well, I don't want to jinx myself, but I've never had fungal gnats or white flies on any of my crops. Maybe they don't like my safe room. They like to live on the edge, be out there. But if you have some of those situations, typically, the fungal gnats is usually a moisture situation, and it's the media. It's usually in the media to start with. It's not going to be on your seed, and so get new media, clean your containers if you need to, but that should let it dry out a little bit. That should prevent fungal gnats. White fly, that's going to be coming in from somewhere else, another house plant or something you have in your interior scape, and so you need to be monitoring those. Challenging, use sticky tapes and things. You can spray them with some horticultural oils or safer soap, or a soap product, but that would be something you just have to manage.
Awesome. So do you have any suggestions? What happens if you start something too early? What do you do then? Do you move it to bigger containers and keep moving it up and just try to keep it going, or any other suggestions?
Yeah, I agree with you. If you want to slow the growth down, then you cool it down, and maybe a little less light. That's going to slow down the rate of growth, but probably just bumping it up to the next container and making sure your light's still going, and you just have a larger plant to put out in the landscape. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think basically you just continue on with your practices, because weather conditions are going to vary from year to year. If we set our frost date is April 15th, well, who knows what it's going to be this year, and you may have to keep your plants longer, or maybe be ready to put them out earlier.
Right. So we've had a couple questions come through also regarding either, transplanting out in a greenhouse or under a tunnel or under cover. And so can you give a sense of how much time you would gain? And in other words, how early you could get that transplant out if you had something like floating row covers or a cover outdoors?
Well, it's going to depend a little bit on how much light energy you're getting through those different products. And I don't have any personal experience with that, but you can take your light meter if you got a phone and get you an app on it and see how much light energy is getting through to the canopy of your plants, and work it that way. I find it harder to regulate temperatures in some of those environments too. If you're home all the time, it's a little easier, but those of us that work 9 to 5, 7 to 10, whatever extension agents end up working, the indoor basement, pretty moderate temperature, and can regulate and save us some effort and work for us pretty well. So I don't have a great answer, I don't think, for that particular question.
No, that's good. I think it depends, like you said, not a straightforward answer on that one. But do you have any recommendations? A couple of folks have asked about equipment that you've mentioned, such as germination equipment or seed starting equipment and transplanting equipment. Is there a certain supplier or place you've gotten some of your things that you use, or?
Yeah, 30 years ago, they weren't as readily available, in my opinion. And so mine was all mail order. Don't want to really promote any company over another, but it's a pretty common mail order company but we find them locally in our garden centers and even in our big box stores nowadays. And so, I've been using it for 30 years and it's all still working, as far as my heat mat and that system. The lights have changed. I replaced my light bulbs, but I think that's all readily available if you want to just go out and look at it. I do like mine that I can regulate the temperature for different crops that I want to grow, but many of them just maybe set at 70, 75 degrees, but that'll work too.
Okay, awesome. So as far as, I've had a couple questions about that. So you use the seed starting mat to keep those plants warm. Now, how long do you leave, once the seeds have germinated, how long do you want to leave those on there? Or maybe talk a little bit about how do you get them off of there to slow that growth down, like you said? What do you do?
Yeah, so once they've all germinated, I crank down the temperature. I may still leave them in that particular flat until they start to get their true leaves. And then I start to pluck them out and put them into a larger container with different media typically, because I've used the vermiculite just to start them. And those, your seed leaves, they have all the energy or the nutrients that they need. And so once you start to get your true leaves, then you need to think about fertilizer or into another media that's going to meet their needs as they continue to grow. But yeah, I think cooling them down is, once they've germinated, I start to cool them down. So I can turn my thermostat down on my heat mats until they're ready to be transplanted and moved.
Excellent. So a couple questions. Do you have a specific recipe for your fantastic growing mix that you want to share?
It's a trade secret that will go to the grave with me, and it's different every time I make it. So, it's just the combination of peat moss and vermiculite and perlite or whatever else I find at the time, and I believe in a uniform, strange brew to work with.
There you go. Yeah.
It's usually I have leftover bags of stuff and I just combine it, but you can definitely buy a pre-made potting media and learn how much moisture you can give it. That's really the challenge when you're having different medias. Your watering requirements are necessary.
Okay. So do you have a little bit of thoughts on fertilizing? Do you have any thoughts on how soon and what to fertilize with on these new seedlings that you've gotten going?
It doesn't take much, that's for sure. So, you may, whatever the packaging product you're using, you may want to cut it in half, or, people do lots of different things. Some people fertilize once a month, some do it every time they water, but dilute it quite a bit. Typically, it's just something that has the nitrogen, the first number, phosphorus second, and potassium the third. And typically, we're looking at vegetative growth. So typically your nitrogen, a little bit higher first number is probably good. I don't do a lot of fertilizing with mine. Probably lackadaisical on that. They seem to be growing fine enough for me till I put them out into the landscapes. So it's whatever product you use. We have a local company here that was my slide. So I'm just promoting my own base here as far as a fertilizer product, but any of them will work.
Awesome. So do you have maybe time for just one or two more here? Any thoughts on, going through that transplanting process when you're moving those little guys out of those trays? Any tips for success there, not to damage those plants?
Well, I think having a good tool, I showed those tools that I got somewhere to help separate the roots. If you wait too long, some of the roots really get mangled in together. But we've done other talks where you grow the roots and the rest of the plant takes care of itself. And but the roots are really pretty resilient. At least that's what I found. And so I'm not really worried about losing some when I transplant. Sometimes when I do transplant, I kind of put them into a dome. I use one of these clear domes to raise the humidity so they can root down and get going without a little stress. And so that's just something I guess I do after I transplant them, is I kind of put them in a terrarium, if you will, to get them to root down.
Okay, excellent. Well, we're at 12:59 and we still have quite a number of questions, so I apologize, and maybe we can get some resources posted, but I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck here and let him kind of close us out. Appreciate everybody's participation.
Thank you, Jason, and Greg, especially thank you for your wonderful presentation. Lots of good comments from folks in the chat box. And clearly, as Jason said, we have a lot more a lot more questions come in than we have time to answer. So check the website. There'll be some resources posted there. And of course, if you can't find the answer you need, contact your local extension office. We've got professionals all across the state waiting to help you. So thank you for joining our K-State Garden Hour series hosted by K-State Research and Extension. We're glad you were here with us today to learn about starting seeds indoors. We have several interesting sessions coming up in our spring and summer series. Please visit the K-State Garden Hour website to see all the upcoming topics. This session has been recorded and will be posted on the website, should be by tomorrow afternoon. After the webinar ends today, you will receive a prompt to take an evaluation survey. Please, please, please fill this out. It's very appreciated and gives us a lot of valuable information. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at gardenhour@ksu.edu. Thank you again for your time. Hope you enjoy the wintry weather. Continue to tune in the first Wednesday of each month and have an awesome week. Goodbye.